Go ahead with you spoke of the frivolity of the Louisville chapter and the need to do something other than.
And these were all great guys and everything like that. It's just that they didn't have any, they weren't really too much interested in doing anything differently than what they'd done, or that they were doing. And it wasn't a question of saying no, you can't do that, but it just made it that it wasn't practical, to break off. I mean, within the group. So, about in the midst of all this stuff, this all started. This discontent actually started up probably 55, 56. In around then. I came in about in the spring of '57, and when it wasn't difficult to pick out, I migrated, of course, to the group that wanted to sing a little bit better. And at the end of that year, we did a very, very successful show and everything. But at the end of that year, everybody knew something had to be done. And so I almost hesitate to tell you what we did.
No, I want to hear it.
Well, we had about 25 guys. And the chapter was chapter had about 80 or 90 people in it. And we had about 25 guys. And the form that they used on elections was that they would nominate. They have a nominating committee, and they would nominate a slate. But they'd also have they would nominate 2 slates, as a matter of fact. And then they would also take nominations from the floor. So what happened, and then he'd come in, they'd say, okay, and then they'd vote on each individual office. It took all night to do it. And they vote on each individual office. So basically what we did was that they had 2 slates. And if one of our guys was on that second slate, that was all well and good. Most of the time he wouldn't be. So what would happen, and we were make nominations from the floor. And if we had one guy was on for this office, we knew that all 25 of our guys are going to vote for him, But there'd be another slate, and then we would also make nominations from the floor. And we generally nominate one of their people that, one of the guys that were a popular guy or something like that. In a nutshell, what we did was to split their vote each time, and our guys got 25 votes every, and before the whole night was over with, and before they knew it, before it dawned on them what had happened and everything, we had taken over the board of directors.
That's wonderful.
And so that gave us control of the board and what we were going to be doing. And they had a couple of some kind of revenue bonds. I don't know, worth about a couple $1,000s, and they treated those bonds like they were, they were the Holy Grail or something. And of course it didn't take us long. We blew the money for the first year. But the success of everything had to be, we were going into the fall of 1957. That's the same year I came. I was only in about 6 months at the time. We're coming up in the fall. It all took place in the spring of '58 when all this was taking place. The elections were back in the fall of '57. Sure. But in 1958, the whole thing was going to depend whether we were going to do it. We had to win the district. We had to qualify to go to the national convention to qualify. And they had been perennially running second, all the time running second to the Northern Indiana groups. And so we managed to pull it out in Lafayette, Indiana, in the fall of 1958. We won the contest. And Bill Benner was the director. We had 24 guys. And we won the contest and qualified to go to the International Convention in Chicago in '59. And that was the beginning of the Thoroughbred success story. Now, actually, the Thoroughbreds, by that time, had gotten their name in the Thoroughbreds. We were the Thoroughbreds from Louisville chapter. And by this time, also, then the rest of the guys, instead of their making a big fight over the thing, I mean, they withdrew from the chapter and formed their own group. And they called themselves the Crows. And they actually formed and chartered a chapter with the society. And the Crow chapter existed for 2 or 3 years. And after that, they found out that they didn't need a society. I mean, they, weren't doing anything to participate in any way, shape, manner, or form. So they just dropped out as a chapter, but they maintained their camaraderie and their grouping for many years. And eventually it became amicable again, and we performed for them almost 2 or 3 times a year, and they became sometimes a benefactor, and it became very amicable after 2 or 3 years. 1 or 2 guys never did ever come around, but for the most part, they did. But everything depended on the success of the Thoroughbred, depended on us winning that first contest. And we managed to do that. It was in Lafayette, Indiana, and we won a very close contest over the Gary, Michigan City group up there. And went to Chicago for the '59 convention. Now, in our group, we had three doctors that one eventually became president of the Board of Aldermen, Dr. Bob Atkins, and he was an anesthesiologist. And Dr. Howard Blackburn, now you probably knew Howard Blackburn.
Heard the name.
And he was an anesthesiologist. And then, well, they were all anesthesiologists. Didn't know that. Anyway, they were John Smith, Howard Blackburn, and Bob Atkins, and Dr. Blackburn was involved with a lot of rich man's hobbies. I mean, model railroads were one of his big deals. Not the big stuff, and sports cars. But he, being a railroad enthusiast, he had a lot of influence, with actually railroads. And so when we went to Chicago on a private car of the president of the Illinois Central Railroad. All of us got on that one car to go up there to Chicago. And it tacked on the end of a freight train. But that's the way we went to Chicago. And halfway up there, every time they make a stop, he'd make arrangements for somebody to go up and spend some time in the cab of the engine, and everything. Well, anyway, we went to Chicago and competed in the competition that first time. And Troy, you just wouldn't believe it. I mean, we wore white shoes, white buck shoes, and they wore plastic bags over them. Tie a plastic bag over you to keep them getting the dirt on them. Had a guy with a little scale going around making sure your handkerchief was just exactly right. You couldn't wear a watch. You couldn't wear any rings except a wedding ring. All that kind of stuff made so much, were so much important back then. Nowadays, they don't pay a lot of attention to that. And so we thought we did very, very well. And we came in 8th. And right here becomes a very, very important part. Now, Gentry here before is not yet involved. I mean, he was involved with doing some work and everything, but down at Evansville, where he was from. I had a quartet that through the quartet I met Gentry. And I referred right off the bat that this guy was somebody that I would want to know a little bit better. Because he was saying the things that I could learn from. But we still didn't, have anything to do with him. Went up there, we got beat. We came in 8th and came back, and we were broke. All the money was gone. We only had 28, 24 guys up there, and you know how it is. You come back from a convention, there's always a group, but now they had to take their own convention, and now they've been rehearsing this whole strongly that it's time for them to take a big deep breath, and other people, Mama was tired of it all, and one thing or another like that. So we were sitting around, when it came time for the district convention again, which with 3 months later, I mean, we were pretty much decimated. And back in those days, you had to have 20 people on stage, or you couldn't compete. And so we looked around, and what are we going to do? And the word was, well, we just won't compete. And then it came up and said, well, look, we are the international representative from last year. We ought to be big enough to go back and and represent the chapter for that. And so it was decided, okay, we would. And we worked for the convention and everything. This time, the guy, the big engine behind everything then was Ed Hackett, and he was he was a society guy from word go, and oh my, he was keeping things going pretty good. And about that time, I met Gentry, and Gentry was by this time a pretty big guy in the arrangement category. Now, there's a strange thing here, Troy, about this chapter. We go to Evansville, Indiana, to compete down there. We had 20 guys, the minimum number of guys, and we'd worked pretty hard and everything like that, but the word was that their steam was coming back out of northern Indiana again, pretty hot and heavy. And Gentry was one of the arrangement judges. Now, it so happened that the Gary chapter was going to sing a song, and they told us the Gentry that they were going to sing a song. The name of the song was So Tired, and the song was, by the day standard, maybe okay, but back then was a really hot song. And Gentry told them that song is not in the barbershop style, and don't sing that song. And that was ahead of time. Well, we sang pretty well, but they sang that song. And Gentry gave them a 35 for singing that song. And with that 35 that they got, and the fact that we sang pretty good and everything, we won the contest again. Now, I really think that the Thoroughbreds could have been a non-entity after that. Very simply, they could have been just fade away had it not been for that little incident right there. And that's when I got to know him a little bit more. And so then the chapter, was up with, we had to do something. We didn't have a place to meet. We didn't have any money. We were down to the minimum number of people. And our director, Benner, said that he was only going to go to we qualified to go to Dallas, and he wasn't going to go if we didn't have 40 people. And so that's what happened. We went out and we got ourselves 42 people, and got back together again. We found a place to meet, which was the old Jefferson Salt Building there on St. Matthews Avenue, right there. We rehearsed there, and we got together, and I met Gentry a little bit more so there, and he actually coached our quartet a little bit, the Derby Towners. He coached the quartet a little bit, and I just became like a little puppy dog with this guy. I mean, I just couldn't get enough of him, and so this was we got 41 guys. And we signed a note at the bank with 41 signatures on it. We borrowed $10,000 and went to Dallas. That's what we did almost every year. Back in those days, you could do that. You'd go to the bank and sign with all those co-signers and borrow the money on a short-term basis, And we went to Dallas, and we moved up a couple of places to 6th place and just barely missed it going into the medals. You know, that was the, you know, the taste of blood, so to speak. And so then we really started getting serious after that. The following year, Gentry still wasn't involved, except on just a social basis. And went to Philadelphia, lost a few people with only 39 men, but got beat by 1 point for the whole 9 yards. Got beat by 1 point by Chorus of the Chesapeake. They had 150 guys on stage. And they beat us 1 point. And the following year, we go to Kansas City and we won it with 48 guys. Now, right after that, had another crisis show up. A week after we won that contest, Bill Benner, who was, you know, the guru as far as, you know, we were concerned, he said, I've had it, I'm finished, I'm not going to barbershop anymore, and so everybody, so long. And I sang in a quartet with this guy. I was president of the chapter at the time. And I never, it was completely out of the thing. We did a show across the river, and while we were changing our clothes after the show was over with, he said, I want everybody's attention, I'm finished. That's what it amounted to. And so we made Joe Wise, you know, became the director, and immediately at that time is when I contacted Gentry, and wanted to be a little bit closer to him than what was going on. And that was, we couldn't compete, of course, but we did set a precedent by going to Toronto and singing what we called Sing the Trophy Away, which is still adhered to this day, but we were the first ones to do that. And Joe was having some problems. I don't want to get too much about that, but right after that, 63 in Toronto, and then in early 64, they came to me and wanted me to become a co-director with Joe. And he was delighted by the whole affair. And that's when we became, as soon as I became part of the director team, is when Gentry became the big man as far as the Thoroughbreds is concerned. And we became his guinea pig on a lot of things that he did, and we formed up with the court. Gentry was a caustic individual. I mean, very, very, he was crusty. And no matter what he said, I mean, no matter what you ask him, you're going to get the answer, you know, whatever he thought. And so, you know, he wasn't, in some instances, he really wasn't the best liked guys around, you know. But he's absolutely genius in what he did. And he took us under his wing, and we took him, and it became a bond that lasted for 20 years. Or, you know, yeah, just about that, you know, from 64 to 85, somewhere like that. And that was, of course, the glory days as far as the chapter was concerned.
Let's take a moment,
yeah.
Jim, and this is you've done such a marvelous job of chronicling up the beginning of the Thoroughbreds up to the first championship, which was in 1962 in Chicago.
Yeah. No, Kansas City.
I'm sorry, Kansas City in '62, and then Ed Gentry's involvement when you became the co-director with Joe Wise, and was at '64, I think you said.
Yeah.
Let's catch up a little bit with some people that I want to highlight before we move on with the Thoroughbreds. You mentioned Bob Issing a minute ago as one of the early directors of the Louisville chapter.
Yeah.
Anything more you want to say about him, or what kind of a man was he? And
Bob Issing was a terrific musician. I don't know exactly what his background was, he was not employed in music, but he was a terrific musician, and he gave probably the chapter his first semblance of any kind of disciplined singing. It's a little bit before my time, but I wanted I would have liked to have been a member back at that time, but at that time I was right in the midst of the coaching situation, and weekends were out of the question for me, and in the fall and the spring, it was very little shot for me to get anywhere, because we were always in meetings, or it took an awful lot of my time. And the only fact that my sainted mother and dad were able to subsidize me as far as being in the company is concerned at the time. But during that 5 months of the year, I was really pretty much out of it. And so it was not possible for me to join the chapter until when I did. I just managed to get things in order a little bit more. Sure. But let me give you just a little incident that took place along that regard, if it's all right with you.
Sure.
Yeah, it was when you started the Thoroughbreds, and I was singing with a quartet with Bill Benner and Howard Monkovsky and Bobby Burnett, and I was singing tenor, and so we were to sing in Evansville in the quartet contest in Evansville on this Saturday, and that night Flagey was playing Central High School. So I was in Evansville and sang in the on the contest, and after we sang our second set, I left. I was still in a tuxedo, and I left and drove back to Louisville, and went to the game, and I was still in those clothes, but I had a trench coat on, and it's in there, I guess. I had a trench coat, and I covered up, the tuxedo and everything, and I thought nobody could see what I had on or anything. Only thing I forgot to do was I forgot to take the makeup off. And you should have seen Paulie when I saw that makeup on. I just forgot it completely. But anyway, I didn't know what had happened, and we played the ball game and won the ball game. And I walked off the field. We played at Emmanuel Stadium, and walked off the field. And my cousin was standing in the gate there, and he says, "Jim, I got a message for you." He said, "Your quartet won the contest." And he said, "I don't know what I'm saying here, but here's the message. Your quartet won the contest, and you're to perform in Evansville tonight." And so now, it's 10 o'clock and everything. Got home, picked up Rosemary and picked up Bobby Burnett's wife, and we started off for Evansville. And of course, there was no freeway at the time. And then we ran into the doggone thunderstorm. You can't believe it, Troy. It was really bad. And I never will forget Sandy sitting in the back seat of the car, and Rosemary had her beads out. And Sandy said, "What are you doing?" Rosemary said, "I'm praying a rosary." And Sandy says, "I'm a good Methodist, but you got another set of rosary beads out." But anyway, that little incident, but we went back. So I went to Evansville in the afternoon, sang in the quartet contest, drove back to Louisville and coached at the football game. Back to Evansville that night for the afterglow. And then the chorus contest, was the one I told you about, was the next day, Sunday afternoon. And and we won that contest. And back home Sunday night for the Sunday night staff meeting with the football team. So that was a weekend I'll never really forget.
Won a football game, won a quartet contest, won a chorus contest in a weekend, and survived a trip to Evansville.
Yeah.
2 trips to Evansville.
Yeah, boy. Okay, where are we here? I got digressed there.
That's okay. How about Bert Harmon?
Bert Harmon is the name I was trying to think.
Okay.
He was the first.
Okay.
He was the first.
Okay.
That was it. He was the first of the organized directors that they had.
Okay.
And he was a band director someplace at one of the public high schools. And a great guy. I never knew too much. I never knew him all that well. I mean, I did know him a little bit, and I did know that he was a good musician and everything like that. I would just imagine he had his hands full with that bunch of guys that trying to make him do anything. I don't know why he left or anything. He directed the chorus for 2-3 years, I think, and then Bob Essing took over, and I think probably made the most progress as far as things like discipline like that's concerned, and then when I came in, Bob had gone, and there were co-directors with Bill Benner and
Ken Snyder?
And Snyder, and what's his first name?
Ken, I believe.
Yeah, Ken Snyder.
Ken Snyder, yeah.
And they were co-directors. And then eventually Ken had to move out of town, and Benner became the only director.
Well, Bill Benner has kind of become legendary, and sometimes the legends get enhanced. And you've already mentioned the fact that how he left the course. Todd, let's talk about Bill Benner for a while.
This is a case of a sad situation. Benner became, well, let me put it this way. He was a genius, actually a genius. Intellectually, he was a genius. He was a graduate of Lafayette University. I think his father he came from an academic family. His father was a professor there. I think his mother was also in the teaching end at the collegiate level. And he was the resident genius for that concern. He worked for GE and transferred to Louisville from the West Coast, and he became enamored with barbershop. And he came to Louisville with General Electric, of course, and was on the fast track. I mean, he was one of the fair-haired boys that were going to go right to the top, I mean, everybody knew it. And then this barbershop thing, that bug got him, and he became he became so hopped on winning a contest that it enveloped him, And eventually, he lost everything over it. He lost his wife, lost his job, lost just about everything. But when he won that contest, I don't know. He became almost invisible, and he wasn't around there too much longer after that. After that, he was someplace else. But the guy was, I don't know what you would call it, but you've heard the term of photographic memory, where somebody could glance at a document and have it to memory. Well, he could do the same thing with a piece of music. I mean, he could hear a song, a barbershop arrangement of a song, and he would have it, all 4 parts. He could just teach it by rote, all 4 parts. And I remember I sang in a quartet with him for 3 years, and we never had a chart. I mean, everything he'd teach a song to all 4 parts to us. And I mean, sight reading or anything was a foreign thing. I never had to do that. Everything was by rote. And the same thing with the chorus. Although sometimes he would get that on paper, but it's primarily a rote thing with him, and he could do that. Have no idea how anything like that could take place. But he'd hear a song, hear a quartet sing a song, and he'd have that arrangement in his mind. He could put it right down on paper if he had to. And so this is the way he was a pretty stern taskmaster, But the guys in the Thoroughbred at the time were just craving that kind of stuff. I mean, they could see the improvement as it went along, and so he became where we got to singing pretty good. And so we won that contest in '62, and it was right after that where he cut out. And by that time, he lost his job I don't know whether he quit or resigned or what with General Electric, and went into the recording business with I can't think what his name is right now, but he's one of the Anchorage, some of that little hoi polloi that Anchorage had back in those days. They still do, I guess. I don't know. And family, a lot of family money, and they went to the recording business, and they did a few things. And as a matter of fact, at first they're often singing. And that's not the end of it.
That's one of
the second album. They're often singing.
Yeah,
it was done. His studio did that, and then just everything seemed to go bad after that. He lost. He just did a little bit of everything wrong. He lost his wife, his family, and everything, and eventually moved out of town.
My understanding is you never saw him again. Is that correct?
Well, I'll take it back. I did see him one time. It was about 10 years later, and I moved into my house on Broadfields in '62, and I was directing, and it was probably in the late '60s when the doorbell rang one night about 11 o'clock, and I went to the door, and there stood Benner. No announcement, there he stood. And I saw him there. He came in and spent about an hour and had a drink or two, and I never saw him after that to this day. And about 5 years ago, I went into a big, heavy search for him. I tried to work up a reunion of, it would be a two-pronged reunion. I wanted to work up a reunion of the '62 guys, when last he directed, and then of all the Thoroughbreds, at the same thing. And I don't know, we did everything to try to find him. Billy Holtz.
Yes.
Well, Billy wrote a little book one time, and he published it of how to locate people, using the internet and everything like that. And he wanted to work on him, and everything, and on that. And he never did find him. We couldn't find any trace of him at all. One time, Billy came to me and he says, I have three names. I have W.A. Benner, I have one in Chicago, I have one in Iowa someplace, and one in Texas. And so I called all three of them. I thought the one in Chicago would be the one, because that's where the last I heard of him, where he was in Chicago as a consultant or something. And I called all three of them, and it wasn't him. And we couldn't find him as a deceased person either. We've never ever found him anyway. And of course, the words out, came out. Well, if he's deceased, somebody killed him. He just didn't have somebody killed him, because he was a weirdo. When they questioned about that.
What kind of singer was he, Jim?
He was just an average singer, but he was just an average singer. Yeah, he could have been anything he wanted it to be, but he was always involved with everybody else's singing at the time. That he never really got around to. He sang baritone, and pretty good. He's a pretty good singer.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
How about? I'm going to rattle off some names that are just kind of legendary to me, and you can react as you want. How about Irv Filmer?
Irv Filmer, God love him, needs something. Irv Filmer was in the wholesale plumbing business. Sold, he sold wholesale plumbing supplies. Made a pot full of money, and never became anything other than just plain as an old shoe. Just the nicest guy you ever wanted. Sang tenor, was always there, always knew his part, and was just a typical thoroughbred. He was a typical thoroughbred. One of the originals, as a matter of fact, even though he was, anyway. Wait a minute. That, just, if you don't mind that ringing for just a couple of seconds there.
Sure.
That's Jay's phone, and
Okay.
the instructions are just to let it go, and he'd pick it up when he's, to stop in a second or two. Yeah, that did it. But our filmer was one of the real a typical thoroughbred, average singer, sang tenor, average singer, but involved up to his neck. Was a chapter officer. What can I say? Other than just a good guy.
Salt of the earth.
Yeah.
Jim, I'm putting you on the spot here, so don't make a big deal out of it. But how many of those original 25 men can you remember, and as far as names? Irv was one of them, I know. I think that'd be interesting if we could throw some of those names out.
Well, if you give me a chance to, well,
Maybe
let's
we
see.
could just-
I can call a few names out to you if you want that.
Okay.
You start off with the Derby counters, which was me and Howard Bunkowski, Bobby Burnett, and Bill Brenner. There was then let's see, there was Harold Fowl, a fellow by the name of John Ernst Spiker, a fellow by the name of Don DePlantier. I'm sure that he's deceased. Joe Cutzinger. I'm going to have to look at the picture.
We
Irv
can,
Filmer.
we can do that. I think
Probably
that'd be nice.
Len Zeffel. Yeah, the picture's downstairs. I'd have to.
We can read those names,
Okay.
and I think it'd
All
be
right.
nice to do that. You mentioned Joe Cutzinger. Go ahead and speak about Joe a little bit.
Well, Joe Cutzinger was right off the bat when he saw he was part of the other group, but right from the very beginning, when the chances to sing with a more disciplined group he came right along. So he was right in on the original organization of the thing, and Joe was a certified judge at the time in the stage presence category. And so he was kind of our link to the international group. And Joe sang bass, always had a quartet going. Was an accountant, both by trade and by temperament. And had no kids. And his wife Margaret was barbershopping was their life, And Joe died very suddenly, and his wife lived a long time, 20 years after that. She was in a nursing home for a long time, but she was well into her 90s when she passed away. Margaret was a I can't say. Well, I can say she's a typical barbershop wife back in those days. Maybe a little bit more so, because they didn't, like I said, they didn't have any kids. But they were the nth degree of the barbershop fellowship, which we don't have nowadays.
Exactly. One of my good friends was Pudge Roederer, and I know Pudge had an awfully big hand in those early days.
He was one of the originals. He was on that. He is one of the originals. And Pudge always had a quartet going. Was in a printing business, and was a perennial chapter secretary for a long time. And then when the Thoroughbreds formed up, he became the same thing with the Thoroughbreds. Kind of a nice singer, sang baritone, kind of an easygoing guy, not aggressive in any way, shape, manner, or form. He just kind of go along. But I can't say enough. I really don't have anybody who's in that original group that weren't, very, very good companions. Who else? Yeah.
How about E.C. Stivers?
Okay, now you're talking about Tim or his dad.
Well, I think I talked about his father.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you can talk about Tim also if you'd like.
Well, Doc Stivers was, the Stivers family, all of them were chiropodists in those days. Podiatrists now, but they're chiropodists back in those days. A whole bunch. Tim's dad and his mother, Tim and Pat and their sister Rose, her brother Ed, and they were all graduate podiatrists. Now, a couple of them got out of the business. Ed dropped out of the business, and Mrs. Stivers became kind of retired and everything. But all the rest of them were very active and as pretty prominent chiropodists back in those days. Doc Stivers was, as he liked to be known, was a fantastic storyteller, a gifted dialect guy. I mean, he could change the dialect in a heartbeat on you and give you anything you wanted, and had these wonderful stories that he kind of specialized in stories that were a little lengthy, you know. And of course, a big part of the charm would be his dialect and that kind of thing. He had a big old house right in the heart of Anchorage, out there. You familiar with that out there at all?
Some point.
Okay, well, you know where the center of the town was, the train station,
Sure.
and all the center of the town right there. Well, right across Evergreen Road was big hill, and I guess there was 5 or 6 acres right there. And right at the top of that big hill was a big old frame house, 3-story house, and that's where the Stivers lived. And that was the place for in the early days. That was the Thoroughbred picnic place. I mean, for all the family picnics and everything was right up there. He was, I think, probably a little better storyteller than Tim. But Tim, Doc Stivers never had to work on it. It was just a natural thing with him. He, a great storyteller. Now Tim is a manufactured comedian and awfully good at it. I mean, the thing about Tim is that he can take a story that may be somebody else's story, but he could take a story in his own style. Getting to the punchline would be Tim Stivers, where Tim Stivers is actually his funniest. It's just getting there. His inflections and it's something that I can, talking about. He's doing the story of David and Goliath, and he talked about he'd have things like he'd go and took his smooth white river rock, put it in that sling, and he threw that smooth white river, and then he'd go blap. And that's the type of thing that he could do so well. He hadn't gotten anywhere near the punchline yet, but on his way there, he'd have you in stitches. And he had a name for everybody and a name for every kind of a situation. Didn't you see that sign there that says yield coming up on you? Yes, sir. I saw that sign that says yield, and I yielded at you 3 times before I merged in the side of your car. And Tim is a very, very fine comedian. But it's something that Tim has made himself do, It just didn't come out of his mouth just so natural like it did with Doc. And there was Pat, of course. And Pat was the reserved one, and Pat and Ed were reserved ones in the family. They participate in everything like that, but they primarily are podiatrists, and that's all they did, and sing a little tenor.
Did Doc Stivers do his comedy on shows?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He'd do it on shows, and he'd almost have something to say at every meeting too. He'd have something to say, and he had a real high-pitched voice, way up there. And of course, he sang tenor. And when they redecorated their offices in the Starks building, and they were really trying to, dress everything up a little bit, and they tried to keep Doc Stivers off the telephone. They want the receptionist to answer his telephone, and Doc, boy, that phone would ring and he'd grab it. It's Doc Stivers, and that just tear the kids up. I mean, they're Pat and Tim, and but the Doc was so plain, boy. I mean, he was just as plain as he could be. But he couldn't hear two sentences come out of him that you weren't laughing, because somewhere along the line he'd have it. Doing this Jewish dialect this one time, and about that guy went to the doctor and he came back and was telling everybody that he was trying to find out what the doctor said he had. He said he had a flucky, and he says, "Can you tell me what a flucky is?" And you get the dialect going here, and everything. And he asked everybody, asked the butcher and the lawyer what an flucky was, and he finally got around to asking a rabbi, and he said, "Well, just exactly what did the doctor say to you?" And he said, "Well, he said you got off lucky." And he finally said, "You got off lucky. Everything is real good." He made a whole story out of that, and that's the type of thing that Doc Stivers could do, and highly successful guy, and terrific.
I've heard that I think Ken Buckner told me that many days during lunch that a group would go over and sing in the Starks building.
There was a bar right there on Walnut Street, right down there at the bottom edge of it was on the ground floor of the Starks building itself, and it was called Kev's, and it was just a typical. It was a little above the average. It wasn't a joint, but it was a cocktail lounge is what it was, but small, intimate, and it was called Kev's. And when the Thoroughbreds first got started, they doing a little bit of everything. They just wanted to be together, and so every Tuesday they'd have a meeting on Monday night, and every Tuesday they'd all meet for lunch at Kev's. And when they got finished lunching at Kev's, they'd go right out on Walnut Street and into the Walnut Street entrance to the Starks building, and right there in front of the elevators and everything, do a barbershop concert.
How about that?
Yeah, you wouldn't even think about doing anything like that now, but that was, it got to be pretty widely known. They had a big crowd almost every Tuesday would congregate there. It'd only be 100 people.
How about that?
Yeah.
Jim,
forgot that.
How did you? We kind of jumped over a little bit. You said you wanted to join the group in the 40s and were coaching and all that. So how did you come into the group in terms of, had you sung in quartets and that type of thing?
I said that mostly it's on account of the coaching thing, but there was another factor involved. Actually, of course, I'm in my 20s by this time, and everything, but I'm still a young guy, and they really didn't cater all to too much of young people coming in. I mean, I know my dad; he wasn't at all interested too much in my becoming a member. He didn't say anything about it or anything like that, but he didn't encourage it in any way, shape, manner, or form. But mostly it was on account of the conflict with the coaching bit, and I was always able to see the last part of their show. We always have a ball game on that night that they had their shows in November. And they did a show at 7 and another one at 9. And I'd usually be able to get there somewhere around 10 or 10 o'clock and see the last part of their second show. Nobody was falling down over themselves to getting any younger members in there at the time. Mm-hmm. Now some just didn't care. I mean, they didn't. Pat Stivers was just a kid, and Tim was just a kid, and they were in there. Mm-hmm. Tim and Pat were in that original group too. Okay. I think.
I think we need to say something about one of the most well-known quartets of the early days that sort of lent an air of authenticity to the barbershop group, I guess, which was the Buffalo Bills. So talk about them a little bit. What's your memory of them and so on?
Well, of course, everybody knew how they hit their big stride. They hit their big stride in the Music Man, of course, and they won the championship in about I think 1950, and they were one of the early groups that were dedicated to good quality singing. Mm-hmm. I mean, they wanted to do everything right musically, as well as other groups that just wanted to sing a whole bunch of chords. They didn't care much about what the story of the song was or anything. Just sing chords and changes and swipes and glides and all that kind of thing. Where the Buffalo Bills were more of a serious group, and they were. If you talk to any barbershopper of my tenure, or my time of being in the society, and I tell you one thing right now, 50% of them will tell you that the reason they joined the barbershop society was on account of the Buffalo Bills. Yeah. And that's before the Music Man thing. But because they traveled extensively and did a whole lot of shows and one thing or another. And the Buffalo Bills were a legend when they got this invitation to join the Broadway show. And two of them, I think there was already a change on this one time. The two of them were different from the originals. But in the group that went to the Music Man, the baritone singer, he decided he wasn't going to do it. And he is a fellow by the name of Dick Grapes, and he didn't go, and they picked up a fellow by the name of Scotty Ward, and Scotty Ward sang baritone with him when all the recording sessions and everything on the Music Man was Scotty. I got to know them pretty well when they actually sang on our show. Really? We had them on the Thoroughbred show. We booked Freedom Hall, okay. And this was part of Joe Cutsinger's little deal. And there's a little incident about that too. We put this show on in Freedom Hall. We booked the Buffalo Bills, and who was the other? We had another championship quartet, the Buffalo Bills, and I think it must have been. They've been the Hitchhikers. Oh, that's terrible. Troy, I never thinking. I thought I'd never forget something like that. And we had the Buffalo Bills, and we had the Afterglow at the. Hey, JJ.
Hey. How's it going?
Hey, JJ.
How you doing?
Good to see you too.
Coming for weekend. That's great.
Yeah, I'm just stopping in before I go up to Cardinal District.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's okay. We'll be down here in just a minute.
Anyway, they came in the show we had, and it was another headline champion quartet on the show, plus the local groups. There's always 5 or 6 quartets in the Thoroughbreds at one time always, and when we got to the Afterglow, the Afterglow was running long, and it was right in Freedom Hall, one of the meeting rooms at Freedom Hall up there. And it came time for the Derby Towners to sing, and so they introduced us, and we said, well, maybe what we'd like to do is let our headline quartet get their thing done so they can get back to New York and one thing or another. And boy, we made a hit with them because they were, and so I had a chance to get to know them, pretty good. Vern Reed, the tenor, was. They were all very serious guys. They were all very serious about what they were doing, and the problem that got them in so much trouble later on, I mean, after they'd been the big success and everything like that, was Al Shea, which was the lead singer. He got to drinking, and doctors told him, he said, you don't quit this drinking, you're going to die. And he didn't quit, and he died. And that took quartet pretty much out of it at the time. But they were very serious quartet, and very. And even though they were doing barbershop shows like that, they would get into the humor of the things and everything, but they were always professional. Let me put it that way. And I think more people joined the Barbershop Society on account of Buffalo Bills than any other group.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Let me ask you, I've got about 4 more minutes here. I want to, just from a personal standpoint, I've been a long time fan of the Four Freshmen. And I know that Bob Flanagan and Ken Albers and all those have really given an awful lot of credit to the Barbershop Harmony Society as we know it today for their sound. They were interested in the sound that you've described so well today. Any association with them through the years or anything?
Not really. I'm surprised at what you're saying right now. I was a fan of those. I was a fan of the Four Freshmen too. They did I don't know how they ever got involved with this, but they did. It was almost a private show over at the. It was the Holiday Inn over there, right by the Playhouse, the Derby Dinner Playhouse. Yeah. That big hotel. They did a performance there in their ballroom, which was quite an intimate affair. And Kenny Buckner and I went to it somehow or other, and we bought a record and asked for an autograph, and one thing led to another, and it came up about the barbershop stuff, and they asked us to join them at their table, and so we spent 15 or 20 minutes with them. I didn't know that they credited this barbershop with some of their. They had some wild stuff. I mean, it was probably. It probably was something to do with the ensemble sound that they were going after.
Ross Barber, who was the spokesman of the group, and I imagine one of the ones you met, has always said something that I never really understood until listening to you, and that was that how there are so many more tones than can be represented by the 88 keys on a piano. And that a lot of times the coloring and the shading that they as a group tried to do were those tones that were kind of in the cracks, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, you see, the thing that you hear on a piano is a tempered scale. That's not the true diatonic scale that was originally set up in the Middle Ages or something when they started to come up with this Western style of music, and the scale was just a little bit different from that. But the problem was is that if they wanted to play in a different key, I mean, say if you had a piano in the true scale, and the piano would play in the key of C in the diatonic scale, But if you want to play a song in E flat, you'd have a whole different piano.
Yeah.
That was done in E flat. And so they found out that if they could temper a note hither and yon through that if they could temper it a little bit, that it would be acceptable to the ear. And of course, what happens is in the barbershop thing, we actually sing in a true scale.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's why you don't like to use a piano too much when you start teaching music, because sometimes it can get to be a problem. But that's a strange thing about that, and but then see, that's why in certain chords the different voice ports have to, sometimes you say, sing that note
Yeah.
in the top part of the tonal center.
Yeah.
If this is a note, there's a note right there, and you can sing it, boom, right there in the middle of it, but you can also sing it here at 6 o'clock or it's up towards 12 o'clock. And it's still the same note and everything, but it's in the bottom or the top of the tonal center. And that's why, I don't know whether you ever heard me say so much, if ever you have a sustained note, you got a note that you posted a note here, and then there's a lot of swiping and chord changing going on around it, like a posted note, and you're singing a tag where you da-da-da-da-da and resolve finally into that thing. If you're singing the same note, by the time they get finished swiping and gliding and every other thing and resolve the note, you're going to be flat.
It'll be flat.
Because when it all comes around, everybody's singing in a true scale, they're going to end up, and I don't know the reason why. I just found out as one of the things that I contributed to the thing was that Gentry could tell you the reason why that would happen. All I say is it did happen. So whenever you got a note posted there and you're holding it and 3-4 notes are going to it, you got to sharpen it when it resolves.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. Mm-hmm. It's quite interesting. A little bit aside, like Irving Berlin could only play on the Black Keys.
My goodness.
He composed all his music on, all in the, I don't know, E natural or something. There's some thing, everything's in the Black Keys, and they all had to be transposed to whatever they.
My goodness. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, we've come to the end of the line here.